television series that has been criticised. This is the Crown series, which is about the British royal family. Beryl, I'll just present this to you, but I know that you've seen the article. Speaking in the Mail on Sunday, Father Yves-Marie Clochard-Bossuet, as I believe it's pronounced, was the priest who gave the last rites to Diana, Princess Diana, who was famously killed some time ago in an accident in a car. The TV show, which covers the royal family, has depicted this incident. And Father Yves-Marie says, showing the scene in the show is voyeuristic and cruel, crass, and certainly not necessary. Netflix are being voyeuristic. Now, we always like to report on royal stories here on Beryl and Pete, and we've covered quite a few stories, of course, including the death of Queen Elizabeth II. We do believe that it's an important part of culture and society, and in Britain, the civic makeup of the country, for us to comment on. So let's look at this. I think that this is perhaps a small story, but it has larger applications. What do you make of this, Beryl? Is this priest, Father Yves-Marie, is he right in his criticism of Netflix? Do you think they're being unnecessarily voyeuristic in portraying Diana's death?
Yes, I think they are. I think anybody who has a television which has YouTube on it, I'm sure they can find, if they desperately want to see the depiction of Princess Diana, can see it on YouTube.
It doesn't need to be dramatised. If you're really that interested, you can find it.
Or there are accounts that can be read of her death without actually needing to see it. I mean, it seems to me somewhat gruesome to want to watch the events of somebody's death. Can we not just believe that we are told that she is dead? Does one need to see it in graphic detail?
It's interesting. I mean, I guess that Netflix would be arguing that it's part of the story, an important part of the story. But
yes, but one can read it without seeing it.
Yes, yeah. What is your reflection, though, on Diana? Because she wasn't ever the queen. She wasn't the head of the royal family. She was married to the next in line to the throne at the time, now the king. Do you think she was an important figure in her time?
I find that difficult to say, because Diana, she was a real person, obviously, but she's also a cultural person. She was a creature of culture.
She certainly had an impact. How do you rate her impact? Having a positive impact culturally, then? Technically, she didn't have any authority, but in common popular culture of the time, she did have huge influence.
Oh, yes, certainly in the fashion world. And it would appear that the value of females in the royal family is to provide a fashion point of view. And certainly she did that.
Yes.
Also, one must remember that she was the mother of the future heir to the throne. And therefore she would have had at least 50%, I would say, influence.
Oh, I see. On the next generation. Yes, actually, William
and
being her son.
What she thought about anything and everything would have had a bearing on that.
Yes. She did champion certain causes during her life, particularly the landmines that were left around during wars, and she was campaigning for their removal, because after war they tended, and I think still tend to be just left, and you end up with people losing limbs.
Yes, and that is so very sad, and I think betrays an attitude of, well, what's our landmines, what difference do they make? You know, if you lived in a country where there were landmines, you'd soon know all about it. If you stepped on one, you'd lose a limb, certainly.
Yes. It strikes me that portraying the death of Diana, the chasing of her car down into that tunnel where the crash occurred, if you were writing the story and you think this is great, this is an important story, so we must depict it, if you're thinking of it as a story, but if instead you were thinking of the people at the heart of it and their cultural significance, Princess Diana had such an effect on the British people. Now, just to say personally, it wasn't that I disliked her. She had no effect on me, let's put it that way. I used to buy the Independent newspaper because at the time they had a commitment of not covering Princess Diana stories, or indeed royal stories, other than ones of actual national importance. And so, oh yes, if I want to read a newspaper, I can read that one and not find out all the latest tittle-tattle, which I'm not interested in. And so I managed to be oblivious to most of her life. So when she died, I didn't know that much about her. I wasn't affected by it because I just didn't know her or much about her. But at that point, there was a huge outpouring of grief, wasn't there?
Oh, there certainly was. I shed tears when Princess Diana died.
So I think you're better placed, Beryl, to comment then on this. We've talked about her bringing up of the heir to the throne. That's an important influence that she had, and her cultural impact on society in Britain. What about the emotional impact? It seemed like there was a group emotion, a mass outpouring of grief. Do you think that that's had a permanent effect? People have commented before, it seemed like it changed British people, or the culture of England, certainly.
I certainly believe that it did. She was a young woman, and she had married into the royal family. She'd married someone whose mother and father didn't even seem to understand him.
Yes.
Or at least that was the impression given at the time by the media.
Yeah.
Those stories were reasonably well known. And by this time, Prince Charles, as he was then, was in his 30s, had not yet been married, and he married somebody who was considerably younger than himself. He'd had several girlfriends, and of course, if you know anything about court protocol at all, each girlfriend was vetted to see if she was suitable.
Yes.
Which I thought was very weird, shall I say.
Well, it's certainly out of the experience of normal people.
If you want to understand the monarchy, you will understand its need to further itself.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want anybody unsuitable marrying the heir to the throne.
Yeah, I can see that from their point of view. But given that's the case, given the big emotional impact, and maybe the change in the way people react publicly, emotionally reacting to people dying, which we saw to a certain extent over the Queen's death. Although, thankfully, we didn't have Elton John singing, as we did at Diana's funeral. That's just a personal comment. But this being the case, you're not arguing, I don't think, Beryl, that Netflix shouldn't be covering it at all. It's simply depicting the actual death that's the issue.
Well, I have to be fair and declare my interest. I do have a DVD of the first series to see what it was like.
Now you know that in the new series, the death of Diana is depicted. Will you be getting the DVD?
No. I bought the first one because I wanted to see how truthful it was to the facts as I understood them, bearing in mind that facts can be manufactured, especially by the media. I wanted to see how true it was to the facts as I knew them. And I've seen it, and I think it does tend to play to the worst aspects of gossip. Let's put it that way. Just how truthful it is, perhaps we shall never know, because the monarchy is not known for its transparency, let's put it that way.
Yeah, so overall, really, it's a thumbs down for the idea of depicting the death of Diana, but we can't get away from the fact that the pressure to include it would have been immense on the writers and producers.
Well, again, the death is surrounded by secrecy. Nobody has ever found the driver of the pursuing car. Nobody has ever found the car.
No, we're straying into what's sometimes called conspiracy theory here. Actually, I'm very much in favour of this conspiracy theories because the usual reason for someone calling something a conspiracy theory is they don't want you to know the truth. So let's label it a conspiracy theory and get people not to talk about it. So let's just briefly talk about it, shall we?
Yes.
Because this does shine light on the first question. Why include the death? What are the possibilities of what happened? The car that was supposedly chasing them never been found? What could have really happened? What are people speculating could have happened?
I hesitate to say. The theory about it came soon after the death of a certain doctor, a scientific doctor, who was involved with weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I can only remember his first name. I can't remember his surname.
What is the broad outline of what people think would have happened?
The broad outline is that events happen which need to be covered up by either the government or MI5 or 6 intelligence services, because if things were found out, we might have mass panic.
Yes. How was Princess Diana involved in this?
Well, Princess Diana, at the time of her death, was involved with the son of Mohammed Fayed, and he was a very influential Muslim who owned Harrods.
Yeah.
That's how rich he was. And she was going out with his son. There was a possibility that they would get married. And then the monarchy would have a certain problem with what would they do with the heir of the throne, and whether Muslims would get involved and maybe even take over Britain. Who knows?
Oh, okay. So she was killed because of the involvement with
the son of Mohammed al-Fayed.
Do you think there were also political,
yes,
military-type problems? Because that's what you were hinting at before.
The theory was introduced to me by Norman, comparing it that Henry II was involved in the death of Thomas à Becket, Canterbury Cathedral.
Right.
He was killed by 4 knights, and who knows why they did it. Perhaps Norman would like to expound on that theory.
I have no facts. This is just purely my gut feeling with regards to Diana. She divorced, or was divorced, Charles, so therefore she then became somebody who was separate from the royal family, and she had no real links at all with the royal family.
Apart from through her son.
Yes, and the royal family could cope with that. But unfortunately, she fell in love with somebody else, and he happened to be A, a Muslim, and B, very, very rich. The possibility was that she would marry him and there would be children. And that is something that I think the royal family would find extremely difficult to actually cope with. So my gut feeling is that somebody at some level said, perhaps the best thing that could happen is so-and-so. And I did liken it to Thomas à Becket and Henry. I'm not saying that anybody gave anybody any orders. I wouldn't put any real who onto it. I wouldn't be right in actually saying it because I have no fact. But it was something that was wished that she would go away. If I could just say, with regards to Netflix portraying it, I don't know what Netflix would be trying to do, because in actual fact, she did not actually die in the car. She was taken to hospital and was on life support for a period of time, and then she died actually in hospital. Because that priest says that he gave her the last rites in the car, but also continued for a number of hours while she was in hospital. So when they say portraying the death of Princess Diana, are they really portraying the death? Or are they portraying the car crash and what happened, and not necessarily including the hospital scene and so on? So I would have that sort of question as to what they are actually really portraying. I'd have a question as to why they're doing so. And I do think it's very, very insensitive. If it was a stage play, the curtain would just gently descend upon the situation.
The report mentions the depiction of her fatal crash, not actually the death.
Okay. Yeah. I would also add to what Norman has said, if Diana had married Dodi Fayed, she would have expected that her children would be able to come and visit her wherever she lived, which would be a problem for the royal family, and those children would come under the influence of a Muslim father and a Muslim culture, which would also be difficult for the royal family, with the Queen in the position of defender of the faith.
This is, of course, all speculation. We don't know any evidence for this, as Norman was saying. Let's wait and see if there's any further reaction, but I think Netflix did. They've gone ahead with their portrayal of it, so it's going to happen. We'll see how big an impact that has.